My name is Samantha Hunt, and I would like to share my research proposal. My goal in my research study is to develop a study that compares the academic and linguistic gains of students that following a traditional teacher-led curriculum, which is inherently lecture-based, as opposed to a student-led project or inquiry-based curriculum. I chose this study for a number of reasons. The first one is my personal background. I grew up in a Wendish family where my grandfather was a native German speaker. And if you've never heard of the Wendish, that's understandable because during World War II, they were forced to convert to speaking only English. And as a result, the native Wendish language is dead in America. Texas German is rapidly declining. And my grandfather was unable to pass his language and culture to his children and grandchildren. I feel like that our student population being largely Hispanic and largely multilingual learners are being forced down that same path. We currently, especially in South Texas, have a large immigrant population, and in education we're struggling to meet the needs of our English language learners or multilingual learners, because many of our students come to us not only speaking Spanish but also speaking their native languages from their home countries that are indigenous to that area. So they're already coming to us bilingual, and they are simply learning English at this point. Many of the districts that I've worked in took the attitude that because the STAR exam is the ultimate goal in how we're measuring student achievement, that we should only allow these students to use resources that are available to them on the STAR exam, namely, generally, a Spanish-English dictionary. And if you're bilingual or multilingual, you know that that is not best teaching practices and that you cannot learn a language this way. Learning a language takes transaction and interaction between the learner and their environment. In addition, I've also found in my years of studying STEM subjects and my years in working in STEM that they are very underrepresented in minority populations and women. So I feel like my study would not only encourage the Hispanic community to get involved in STEM education, but it would also encourage my students to not only become more fluent in English, both academically and conversationally, but it could also affect their academic language and their native languages too. My research questions include: how do the academic gains in students learning from a traditional teacher-led curriculum compare to the academic gains made by those students using a student-led project-based curriculum with minimal lecture and more collaborative work? And in the same groups, how do their linguistic gains compare? In my research design, I would have two groups. I would have a control group. The control group would have more traditional style instruction. It would be largely teacher-led with lecture and book work, paper homework. The experimental group would be minimal lecture. It would be a student-led environment, more inquiry-based, project-based education. I would get, my participants would be high school students because that's the age I teach right now, and in addition to that, high school students are less likely to have a stronger academic language background, academic vocabulary in either English or their native languages. So I could measure their linguistic gains better. So that my study would be statistically sound, I would like to have at least 30 students per group. However, it would be better if I could have more than that. And I would like to see an even split between the multilingual learners and the native English speakers so that there's more interaction between the two languages going. Ideally, the length of the survey would be a year or more, so that I could see and measure more growth, but that would, of course, depend on the school that I was performing the research at. The theoretical framework behind my study is Dewey's concept of transaction, and that's that learning arises between the interaction between the learner and their environment. This is an idea that we find inherently inside of project-based or inquiry-based learning, which Dewey was also a huge advocate of. And that transaction includes the interaction between students and their peers, which is not only going to enhance their STEM learning, but it's also going to enhance their language learning. Some of the issues I have with current trends in education is that it doesn't fit within this theoretical framework. Our curriculums, such as Carnegie, are not engaging to the students. They're basically workbooks that we're filling out. They can be inquiry-led, but it's very hard for a teacher to do so. In order for a teacher to follow all the curriculum, the teacher has to lead the lecture and the learning. And in addition, they do not lend themselves to language learning. They're already written at a very high academic vocabulary level, and therefore the English language learners have a tendency to become lost in the lessons because of it. In conclusion, although research supports project-based learning, we have a tendency, and I suspect because of the teacher shortage, we have a tendency to just hand a curriculum to our teachers and say, we have to follow this. Here is your pacing calendar. Here is your lectures. The curriculum I was handed even had the PowerPoints already made that we had to follow. And because of this, these current trends are doing a disservice to our students, both in learning STEM education and in language learning. And I would like to see my study address this. Thank you.